On this episode of Therapy Bites Art Lab.
If we think of anxiety as something that is a threat to us, just think about that for a second. If you tell yourself that anxiety is the threat, then ironically, you're going to create what we call a grizzly bear alarm response to getting away from something you can never get away from. Which means that trying to get rid of anxiety, you're literally running from yourself.
Welcome to Therapy Bites Art Lab, where Dr. Heath and his special guests share real-life stories of helping and healing, fresh from the actual therapy couch, while taking a bite out of common counseling missteps and misconceptions. And now, here's Heath and the T-Ball team.
Okay, hey T-Ballers, we are switching up our episode structure just a bit, and we're going to have some short-form episodes every other week and some long-form episodes where we interview some world-class thought leaders, and we look forward to you guys catching our interview episode coming next week. But today we're going to be answering a question. The Art Lab team is going to join in here to answer a question about anxiety and some psychology secrets about anxiety. And the question was, Doc Heath, do you have a specific episode on how you talk to your amygdala? I have forever had panic disorder and horrible anxiety and need help. And you know, we're with you. I'm with you, certainly. I had really challenging bouts of anxiety in my first year of undergraduate school, and episodes of panic. And you notice I said episodes of panic, and that's one of our first secrets, and we'll talk about that in a bit. And I have here in the Art Lab with me here today our team, Therapy Bites Art Lab team. ART stands for Accurate Realistic Thoughts, and Lab stands for Life Affirming Beliefs. And we're so grateful for that question. If you guys have questions, pop it up there on social media, DM it to us. We're on Twitter and Instagram and Facebook, and we just love questions, and we'll try to get to each one of those, even in your own special episode. And today's episode is for Tiffany, and she posted this on social media, so I'm sure she doesn't mind putting out a question that we can answer, maybe help lots and lots of people. And you can be part of helping lots of people by just, asking questions. Okay, gang, give us some thoughts on your anxiety and how to deal with anxiety and your experience with anxiety. We had this wonderful question here, but what are some of your questions about it, responses to it, thoughts on it?
Well, the first thing that comes to my mind is anxiety is a very uncomfortable emotion, but is it not just a normal human emotion? Is it something that we should try to avoid and get out of our life?
It's interesting you should say that, because I have been having a pretty lively discussion with some other folks about anxiety. You really can't get rid of it. Maybe if you had a 3-pound hammer and hit me in the head really hard, I'd be comatose, not have anxiety. But I even think that that's arguable, because anxiety is what gets you to the restroom. It kind of lets you know that there's pressure in your bladder. Otherwise, you'd sit here and say, oh, gosh, how warm and fuzzy is that? That's not the kind of warm and fuzzy that you want. And anxiety, yes, is engineered literally into we humans. And if it was comfortable, it would be useless. So the first thing we can stop doing is stop trying to stop anxiety. Stop trying to stop anxiety.
Yeah, because I've noticed that if I try to stop anxiety, it just gets bigger and bigger and bigger and chases me all over the place. It doesn't go away.
Well, and the reason for that is because when you focus on something, your brain will make more of it, because your brain perceives that the focus means this is an important focus, and it really just widens the radar. For instance, and we'll talk about mindfulness maybe just a tad before we run out of time, and this episode's only going to be 20 minutes, so we'll try to pack as much into as little space as possible. But for instance, one of the mistakes that people make during mindfulness is they think that mindfulness is meant to stop non-preferred emotions, when mindfulness is really meant to be, as the term goes, mindful of what's going on. It's kind of like clouds in the sky. You don't chase the cloud across the sky toward the horizon. you simply notice that there's a cloud moving from right to left or left to right, and you do nothing with it. You're there as a observer. I talked to someone the other day who said that a clinician talked to them about basically thought stopping, which is a useless technique. If that works for you, please let me know what you're doing. I've never found that worked for me doing anything. In other words, just stop thinking about something. If you have anxiety, just stop focusing on it, stop thinking about it. And especially in mindfulness, that is the last thing you want to do. You really want to simply observe the anxiety, not get rid of it. In the mind, the things that you try to get rid of, you tend to try to getting rid of it tends to fertilize it and make more of it.
And that kind of goes along too with emotional reasoning. So something I hear very frequently is if I'm experiencing anxiety, that must mean something. It must mean I shouldn't go to the store, or I shouldn't talk to this person, or I shouldn't, participate in this event. The anxiety has to have some sort of meaning, and I have to do something about it, right? But the thing is, the anxiety itself is not what's important. It's the thoughts that are behind the anxiety that are important. So the anxiety doesn't mean that you should or shouldn't do something, and that shouldn't be the determining factor.
And that's a great point on the cognitive behavioral model. Is what comes first is a event, situation, or circumstance, but then we have the power. I mean, think about it. This is very, very empowering. We have the power to decide what we're going to think about it. And based on what we decide to think about it, that is going to create, literally manufacture more of, well, whatever emotion that is. And if we think of anxiety as something that is a threat to us, just think about that for a second. If you tell yourself that anxiety is the threat, then ironically, you're going to create what we call a grizzly bear alarm response to getting away from something you can never get away from, which means that trying to get rid of anxiety, you're literally running from yourself rather than I have the presence of anxiety. And the only question is, well, there's many, but one is, what needs to be done? And when I'm having anxiety, which I do every single day, I simply look at it as information and I decide what I'm going to do with it. And usually what to do with it is nothing, no thing. I simply let it be there, realizing that it will go away in its own time, but never completely, because, well, that wouldn't be healthy. You would live about 5 minutes and you'd be hit by a truck. Anxiety can also be information that helps you look around and say, what is this? And then you say, Mack truck, move. And it's just really, really quick, but it can save your life. But just because you have anxiety doesn't mean that you're in a life-threatening situation. But you can geotag or program your brain to believe that every time there's a presence of anxiety, that equals a life-threatening situation, but it simply does not. But you can program your brain to believe that. Just like you can program your brain to believe that every time the smoke alarm in your house goes off, you should call the fire department. If that happens and you're, well, at my house where I like my really crispy toast, you'll have the fire department showing up every time you make your crispy toast. And then the fire department, well, they'll probably stop showing up, or they'll start charging you for every time they do show up. But just because the smoke alarm goes off doesn't mean there's a need for the fire department. And just because the smoke alarm of your anxiety goes off doesn't mean there's a fire or a threat, a life-threatening situation. And if you respond to it that something must be done every time you have the presence of anxiety, then you'll be running literally from yourself the rest of your life. And part of human living is the experience of anxiety.
The Therapy Bites podcast is HIPAA compliant. No identifying patient information will be disclosed by Therapy Bites podcast hosts or Therapy Bites podcast guests without permission from patients or guardians. All personal stories are de-identified in order to comply with HIPAA, the NASW Code of Ethics, and the ethical principles of psychologists and Code of Conduct. Fresh from the therapy couch and from the deep dark recesses, stories may involve exploding preconceived notions and topics uncomfortable to underthinkers and small farm animals. Audience discretion and duct taping your head for safety is advised. Concrete-headed Kool-Aid drinking humans assume all risks associated with any possibility of choking to death on the accurate, realistic thoughts presented in the art lab. This is natural selection, and Therapy Bites podcast management and hosts are not responsible.
A lot of people say that you just can't talk yourself out of anxiety, but the protocol with cognitive behavioral therapy has nothing to do with talking yourself out of anxiety. But having said that, that would be like saying that you can't talk yourself out of driving to an old address, or you can't talk yourself out of dialing an old phone number. The brain learns, and it's important to be aware of what we're teaching our brain over time via repetition. I'm kind of reading from the response that I gave a person on social media. All emotion, including panic, is manufactured by encoded thought processes. Panic is like a phone number your brain will continue to dial up until other responses, alternative responses, are programmed. But in the moment, you can no more stop panic in the moment than you can stop being in Chicago once you've driven to Chicago. Once you've driven to Chicago, you're in Chicago because that's where you're driven. Thought processes, both implicit and explicit, are what manufacture the roadway of how we wind up in anxiety or wind up in panic. And over time, you can recarve, remap those roadways. And that's what this process is all about.
You're listening to Therapy Bites Art Lab, bite-sized therapy for your brain with Dr. Heath and the T-Ball T. The best advice on the net. No copay required.
For full show notes and transcript of today's episode, go to therapybites.podbean.com.
Here's Heath and the T-Ball team.
And everything that we're talking about today, too, it requires practice. So this isn't going to just be a quick fix, slap a Band-Aid on it type of deal. It's going to be something that you have to you have to be mindful about it and practice it every single day. We don't really like to label good days versus bad days, but if you are having a day where you're not experiencing as much anxiety, that's a really good day to practice even harder. So that way it'll become a habit, and that'll be kind of your default mode whenever you do experience, maybe some more intense anxiety.
I'm actually personally anxious right now on audio, on camera. I am looking at a screen, and I realize that my heart is beating a tad faster than it was before we started recording. In realizing that, I catastrophize it just a little bit, thinking of how others are going to think about the sound of my voice and the content of my speech and all kinds of things. And that affects how I speak. As my dad would often say, I'll get my tongue wrapped around my eye teeth and I can't say a word I'm saying. But then I remind myself that there's no threat here, that I'm here speaking, trying to help, trying to relay valuable information, realizing that people listening that really find value in this aren't going to be critical of what I'm saying. And the people that are critical of what I'm saying, they're just listening for the wrong reasons anyway. And therefore, I'm not really speaking to those people that might be unnecessarily critical and just here to fault find or whatever. I'm just speaking to people that are finding meaning and usefulness in this, and I'm here to serve them. And so even as a professional clinician, I have anxiety. We actually had to stop the tape and start re-recording this because I screwed up and I had to start over. My team sat here very patiently while I did that. So another misconception out there with anxiety is that clinicians know this world-class secret or have this secret sauce where they just don't experience normal human emotions, and that's just not true. That's just disingenuous for clinicians that don't self-disclose that even they have the same emotions and in many of the same ways, and it is hard for them because it's supposed to be. As we said earlier, if anxiety was easy, anxiety would be useless. Let's talk some strategies here today. What are some things that work for you guys?
Breathe.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
When I notice that I'm anxious, typically I'm breathing shallow or I'm holding my breath.
Mm-hmm.
That's one of the two. And so I breathe.
Gosh, Debbie, I just noticed I was doing that.
I'm doing that
As soon
too.
as you
I
said
do.
the word
I'm doing it
breathe,
right now.
I literally took a deep breath. And you listeners, I encourage you to do that. Bring your attention more to your breathing. I think that is one of the first things to do. And that makes everything else work a lot better if you'll just oxygenate the brain.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you might say, do you breathe in your nose, out your mouth, or in your nose, out your nose, or in your mouth, out your mouth? And I know, you guys have seen research out there, but as Mark Twain would say, there's lies, there's damn lies, and then there is statistics, and often research will prove what it intends to prove. Personally, I find it really hard to breathe just through my nose when I'm running.
Mm. Yes.
Try that.
Mm-mm.
Does that mean I'm getting less than fully oxygenated? I don't know. I'm really huffing through my mouth. I think the stuff you get when you breathe through your nose is called oxygen, and the stuff that you get through your mouth when you breathe is called oxygen, and the stuff that you get when you breathe through both nose and mouth is called oxygen. I recommend that you breathe in a way that's most comfortable to you. Breathe.
Mm-hmm.
My mantra, and I'm not sure where I got it. Sometimes I like to think that I created it, but maybe I borrowed it from somebody, is my brain is the train, my breath is the track, my breath keeps my brain on track. And I'm not trying to change anything. So there's a tip on breathing and a tip on mindfulness. Tip number 2 on mindfulness. Stop trying to change anything. If you find yourself being distracted by a thought, oh, squirrel, that's okay. Squirrels are great. I have squirrels all over the place here. And Debbie is a squirrel lover. She even has a squirrel shirt on. I don't have ducks in a row. I have squirrels, and they're everywhere. And your brain can be kind of squirrely. Our brains here are kind of squirrely. But that's okay. You realize you're having a thought, then you bring your thought back on focus.
I find grounding helps a lot too. I enjoy the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 technique a lot, where you notice 5 things you can see, 4 things you can hear, 3 things you can touch, 2 things you can smell, and 1 thing you can taste. And for me, the one that works the best seems to be texture, but I practice doing it with all the senses as much as possible. But I'll and when I'm anxious, like I'll feel my pants or make sure I'm wearing something or have something nearby that has like some sort of texture to it. And by playing with it and practicing deep breathing while I'm doing it, that kind of makes sure that I stay in the moment, which is what mindfulness is all about. So that can be really helpful.
Well, even with breathing, and this is something that I've recently had somebody tell me about, is, some of the somatic sensations you may experience from anxiety, but they'll be like, well, my chest is tight and I can't breathe. And I'm like, wait a minute. If you tell yourself you can't breathe, you're going to believe yourself. But if you're talking during this, or even if you're breathing shallow, you're still breathing. And then I kind of go into detail on what it would actually look like if they weren't breathing, and kind of remind them what we tell ourselves is what we're going to believe. So if you think that you can't breathe, you're going to actually ramp up that anxiety, and it's actually going to be a lot worse and a lot harder to breathe.
Well, because you're telling your brain to go into an alarm state.
Mhm.
When is it ever good to
Right.
not breathe? Almost never, unless a velociraptor is after you and you're in Jurassic Park. They may be holding your breath so they can't see you. I don't know. I never run into a velociraptor. But here's another quick tip on breathing is pot belly breathing. Yes, I know, not an attractive term, but forget about all that. Put your hand on your belly and breathe and experience your hand lifting as your belly protrudes. And I'm not saying you have to do this walking down the street, but find a nice quiet place and do some pot belly breathing. And breathing in and experiencing the in-breath, breathing out and experiencing the out-breath. And as you do, you can experience with your hand your pot belly, which is okay to have, expanding, and that is life-giving oxygen filling your brain. Now, this won't be the last episode we do on this topic, so please do get on there. If you have questions or comments, let us know what works for you, what doesn't work for you. If we missed something that works for you, gosh, we're here as fellow humans helping each other. Let's do that. Put that in the chat, and we'll love hearing from you guys. Catch us next time for the interview episode coming up next week. And as always, go out there and take care of yourself. Focus on your thinking. Your thinking engineers your life. Bye-bye, guys.
Bye.
Bye.
Hey, T-Ballers, thanks so much for being with us today. If we brought value to your day, show us some love by leaving your positive feedback and inviting some friends to listen in and join the T-Ball team.